So today we're actually going to work on an existing game that was built years ago by myself, and it was built to run specifically just on iOS, and it was developed on Xcode. So I am going to port it to Visual Studio and get it up to snuff for this course. So it'll be part of the training for the C++ course. Anyway, I am looking for command prompt. Okay, CD. Let's go ahead. So I've got this on Bitbucket. So we'll make a dir for repo for our online repository. We'll pull this from Git. So we'll clone it. And hopefully I've got the URL correct. Cool. So I don't know how long this will take. It'll probably be a lot of trial and error. So porting the C++ source code, most of it's, for the most part, is going to work straight in Visual Studio. But we are dealing with a game with a lot of scenes, menus, yeah, so, and a lot of resources too. So we've got, this game's got sound, it has sound effects, it has sprites, particles, yeah, so there's a little bit here going on. So this is going to take a little bit of time. So in the meantime, we will close this solution. And we'll create a blank one. It's training. I will probably do this in the repo. Actually, I probably should wait till it's fully downloaded. It's been 6 or so years, I think, or maybe 5 years since this game was developed. And this game, it's okay. It's fun. It is. It was built for a 48-hour game competition, and I never really did anything with it, so I might as well use it as one of the final projects for our C++ training. Today I would have actually done some C++ training because we didn't get very far. It's just I didn't have time to get the slides ready, so today's kind of a watch me work day, which may be better. Okay. So we are 55% downloaded. So it'll take a little bit of time. I'm going to drink my coffee. It's pretty big because just the sprites, so the graphics, the sound effects too. I mean, even though they're compressed OGG files or MP3 files, in aggregate, altogether, they do bloat the size a bit. let's go to, we'll go to C training. I thought the dot meant C. Maybe it's the backslash. Repo. Cellvolution is the name of the game. So there is actually a Windows 8 solution. Maybe I will open that up and see how far that gets us. Okay. So file, open, project solution. Manager source repos. No. One thing with Visual Studio is 2013 was really good. 2010 I really liked a lot. 2013 was like just an improvement on 2010. I think there was a 2012 as well, but just where I was working at the time, we went from 2010 to 2013. We kind of jumped 2012, and I think it went from 13 to 15 and now to 17. I didn't use 15 too much, and I just started using 17 now because most of my development's been in JetBrains products like WebStorm for some full stack JavaScript and IntelliJ for some Flash builder stuff we've been doing. Anyway, yeah, Visual Studio, like they're starting to put, you know, these pre-made directories in for you. I think they're really trying to force you to use their online TFS stuff, Team Foundation Server, and their online Visual Studio product. Try to push it to the cloud. I'm not a fan of that, especially with like GitHub being free. I use GitHub rarely. I would use it all the time because it's got such a great community. But a lot of my projects, unfortunately, I have to put into private repos. So GitHub charges you for the private repositories, you know, so they're online, but they're only viewable to people with the credentials to get there. But Bitbucket, it's bitbucket.org, by the way. They're just like GitHub, but they're not as big. But they allow unlimited private repositories, so I tend to use them a little more. But I think I'll start sharing a lot more of my stuff, which is, and I'll get more onto GitHub. It's not like I'm not on there much. I mean, I've got 20 or 30 repos on there. You know, nothing too popular, but okay. Anyway, let's see. So right on, checking out files, great. And it's taking a bit of time here. It's been sitting here for a while. I hope there's nothing wrong with connection. So we can kind of quickly look at some of the source code anyway. I think most of the files are down. So we have our class files. Looks like nothing's in here. Oh, well, I've got a filter on here. So let's see if I can. Let's browse this in File Explorer. Have a look at what's going on in this project. So tooling, yeah, these static libs. I think this is a project I created for the Cocos2d-x community years ago. And I built the static libs. So the libraries, like if you were here for yesterday's course, we talked about compiling your C++ source code from text into what's called a translation unit or an object file. Throughout this course, we're going to compile mostly to executable, but you can also compile to just libraries in C++, so they don't actually execute anything, but the code is there, compiled to native instructions for the operating system so that you can reference those libraries in another project and just call the functionality, like the code itself, out of those libraries. So you can compile an actual lib file. These seem to be the raw source. And yeah, they just need to be compiled. So we may have to compile some of these static lib libraries. So yeah, we'll get to that. But the interesting stuff is in here. So classes. So we have some header files. We got some CPP files. A lot of this is way beyond what my Twitch channel has been streaming. Yeah. So if you're really interested in learning from beginner, watch the stream I did yesterday. It's just under 2 hours. That's really beginner C++ stuff. Today is going to be really advanced stuff, but it isn't really part of the course because it's just me getting the final projects completed and ready to use as problems and exercises for us. So what you're going to see me doing here may be a bit confusing, and I won't really hold up much because you can see there's a lot of code going on in here. I may I may pare this stuff down just to remove a lot of extra stuff. There's a little bit too much code, might be a bit daunting for somebody starting out with C++. Anyway, let me see where our git pull is at. Yeah, it seems to be frozen. I'm going to just Control C. Try the clone. I don't think the clone's going to work because it's already there. So we'll cd into Salvolution directory. I'll check out the git status. See what's going on here. It's all up to date. Everything seems to be actually okay. Let's see, git status. So yeah, everything's up to date. Nothing's checked out at the moment. Good. I think we're okay to open up the solution file for Windows 8. So we've got Box2D. It's a 2D physics engine. If you remember Angry Birds, this physics engine was actually interesting story. The who is it? Rovio, I think, owns. Yeah, it's Rovio. I think I'm pronouncing it right. They're the people who created Angry Birds, and from what I remember, it was a couple of guys, and I think they're Swedish, and they went to a game convention where a guy, and the guy being the guy who created this Box2D physics game engine, he was a presenter at the convention, and so it got them excited about seeing the examples of how this Box2D could be used, and they created Angry Birds from it, and they used the Box2D engine. So anyway, it's pretty popular for smartphone games, right? For Android and iOS games, because most of them are two-dimensional, right? They're not really three-dimensional. There are three-dimensional games, but yeah. Chipmunk, another physics engine. Haven't used that. Cocos2d-x game engine that we'll be using for some of the final projects. Denshon, if I'm pronouncing it right, is the sound engine. TinyXML, exactly that. Lets you read and write XML files. Anyway, let's open this up. So, great. Looks like we're going to have a lot of... so it looks like it'll be some fun slugging in the mud, trying to get this going. But that's okay. I find that I learn the most when I start from a really rotten position. Okay. So, so it just looks like some build targets weren't found. Build targets are like what are in the drop down. If you've ever used Visual Studio, you can set certain like solution configurations and build targets. Confirm that the path import was declared, and that Yeah, I'm not too sure. I may just kill the project file and start fresh. So let's go ahead and consider that. So likely the project file will be in here. Oh, interesting. I've got some source code in here as well. It must have been. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll figure this out. So here's the VS Proj file, the filter file. Oh, the store key. That's for the Windows Store. I actually put the game up on the Windows Store back in the day. And yeah, anyway. We don't need the app manifests. A lot of this is just plumbing for Visual Studio, not that it's necessarily important for actually creating a C++ project. So what I'm doing here is kind of irrelevant. Precompiled headers, something you probably aren't familiar with yet. Good. So rad, 200 rad. What is this stuff? Anyway. Okay, so I'm going to remove this. So we'll leave the solution. You know what? I'm going to remove the solution as well. Let's close. I don't want to save it. I want to. Oh, I don't like that at all. Let's go ahead and new project, empty project, repo, Salvolution, and I will put it in this folder, and it should create a folder underneath for us. So we'll just call the solution Salvolution win for Windows. Let's just have, oh, I guess I had that shared. So good, it created the directory I wanted with our solution file and our project file within here with the filters. So since this is Windows, actually, let's go ahead and so we'll do this, and I'm just going to log in. I'll do it on another screen just to make sure it's kind of secure. Cool. So I'm going to create a new repository. I might create a new organization for this stuff. How do I do that again? New. Not a new repo. Not a repo. New organization. There we go. So we'll just call this Twitch. Twitch. Maybe I'll just do the username I use on Twitch. Free version, not a company. Okay, good. We'll call it, yeah, so CPP. Sometimes you see CPP or CXX. X's are kind of the pluses a bit inverted on a 45. So we'll just go CPP training. Good enough. Source code for Twitch TV CPP game training. Public is fine. Initialize with a README. We will add an ignore file for typical C++ extensions. And MIT license is fine. Oh, I guess no README. Okay, so why did I want to do that? I want to create a new repo. Git clone, and I can just copy the URL here to clone it. So we'll cd into CPP training. Perfect. Now, so what did that do? So that gave me the ability to maybe just start migrating this code into a fresh repo on GitHub that everybody can access. So eventually I'll just share the link to that repo on GitHub. And I'm going to start putting in all the source code during the training within here. So we will create a new folder called games. And unfortunately, I'm going to do all this over again. New project, C++ empty project. Repo is, let's just do this. I'll select this folder and we'll call it Salvolution. And I won't put in Win there because it'll only be for Visual Studio, so I don't think I really need to bother. Good, so we've got this. We've got our project in here. I might create a new folder called SRC for our source. And I'm going to start copying. Can I duplicate? I guess not. For now, that should be okay. iOS specific stuff, yeah. This is all Objective-C stuff. Just to bootstrap. Java, this is Android Bootstrap. So our libs, sweet. But this is actually the pure source code of Cocos. Yeah, that's my Coco shenanigan for game stuff. Libraries. .a, I think that's a .assembly. That's compiled in on Mac. So I don't think it will be binary equivalent for a Windows program. I need resource. Here we go. Resources. Definitely we need the resources. So we'll copy that. Since everything is uppercase and fully spelt, I might just rename that to source. Okay, that's a bit of a start. Let's go ahead and see how far I get here. And we'll move our header files to our filter folder called header files, just to keep things organized. Right, these folders in Visual Studio are virtual, so they don't really exist. They're not a true folder like you would see in Windows Explorer. So just moving them around in here is valid. I want to remove those. I won't delete them from. Okay. So I don't think we have a main method to execute this project, strictly because I think it was in those Objective-C code files for iOS. Okay, let's just try. This will completely fail, but let's do it. Let's build. So, right. No. So all of these errors, they're looking for those hashtag include files. So during the build and compilation of a C++ program, it really has 3 steps, but the compilation step kind of has a pre-step where it looks for anything with a hash symbol. And if we look at, just look over here, I can't really highlight this gutter. I can open up one of these. So anything with a hash symbol in front of it is a preprocessor directive, which when compilation is about to occur, all of these preprocessor directives are exercised before compilation starts. What I mean by that is, for example, this hashtag include file is expecting to find a header called Cocos2d-x. It's a source code file, just simple text. And it needs to find it, and it will replace this whole line with the contents of that header file. So you can see Visual Studio actually gives us a bit of help here. It gives us the red squiggly. So we know that it's unable to resolve the location of that. Because it can't resolve the location of that, it doesn't have a reference to a namespace named that, a class named that, a class named that, and so on. And a free function named that. Okay, so we need to work this out. Yada yada. So I'm just thinking, the Cocos2d-x source code I was using for this game is old. Like, it was built back in 2012, near the end of 2012. So we should probably use the latest and greatest version of Cocos2d-x. First off, because it will probably be modern C++, which this whole course is about. It won't be using as many pointers, hopefully. The stuff that's a bit scary about C++, we're going to try to avoid as much as possible. So I think if we go ahead, Cocos2d-x, I think it's .org, or I could Google it. Let's just Google it. -x. Download 3.1.6, and then they must have a legacy version that they carry forward. We'll just go straight into the latest, greatest. I don't know why this is taking forever. I'm not sure what's going on. Okay. Not very impressed with their website. First off, oh, Learn does work. I tried it before, it didn't work. You know what? I might just go to the source code on GitHub and see if they have a release. Release. Here's the zip file for what I was trying to download. I'll get it straight from GitHub. Forget these guys. Their goofy download. Cocos2d-x is a C++ version of the Cocos2d project or game engine. You can call it a game engine, a game library, a game framework. People will argue what to call it. Is it an engine, a library, a framework? I don't know. I mean, it's a library in the fact it gives you functionality that you can reference. It's a framework in that it has constraints that you sort of have to follow. They don't really have an exposed game loop, for example, if I recall. So they do have some constraints that may be a bit different than creating a traditional game. So you could maybe call it a framework in that regard, because you're kind of constrained by a framework. You're not just given a library to cherry pick functionality out of it. So I don't really care what people call it. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm not big into those monikers. Anyway, so Cocos2d was an Objective-C source code project on, I guess, Git back in the day. I never really used it much. I tried it, but I really hated Objective-C. I just was not a fan. And the more I got into Objective-C, the more I found out it was actually a really old language. I mean, I think it was developed not much after C++ was created. Back in the day when Steve Jobs left Apple the first time, or maybe the only time, and created that company called Next, where they created those Next computers that were like $20,000. And they had a proprietary operating system, and it was built from this Objective-C, which is just like lipstick on top of C or C++. It was kind of gross. And yeah, I shouldn't say that because someone will hear this and it'll start a flame war over it. Anyway, I'm downloading this too many times. I don't know what I'm doing. Let's show this in the folder, and I will unzip this, and I will. Okay. So I may just pull out what I need from here. I can make, which is a build utility to build the source code, but I might just use the source code straight up. And I'm assuming this might be our source code. So here's our Cocos2d-x file, which we couldn't find. So let's go ahead and start by bringing in Cocos. So let's copy that. Let's go to GameCellvolution. Let's create a new folder called Libraries. We'll leave that there. External dependencies, these are all the guys I am referencing. Okay. So now we get to do a bit of Visual Studio magic here once this copy's over. Instead of actually dragging the source code into here, I may just reference the folder location using some relative pathing. And if we go and right click on not the solution but the C++ project, go to the properties, we can kind of work our way through some of these properties. And Visual Studio, especially for C++, it really has a lot of properties for it. And it is a bit scary to begin with when you first use it, but a lot of these properties you won't really need to change. So let's just look here. Working directory is project dir. So project dir is our, if I go edit, you can see project dir is defined there, and it's kind of like a variable, like a special, it's like a special keyword that's used for Visual Studio, and using the parentheses and starting with the $sign, it basically calls that variable and lets you use the contents of it. This has nothing to do with C++, by the way. This is kind of a Visual Studio thing. So if you want to take this in, you can if you want. Anyway, project dir gives us our path to where our project is, which is here. So we've got training repo, C++, training, game, Salvolution. So great. So we know project dir is something I want to use to reference those files. Now let's go to VCC directory. We want to have a reference directory here. Not a library directory, because we're not referencing actual compiled libraries which end in .lib. Could end in .dll on Windows machines, but I think those might be kind of .NET C++ managed stuff. But what we want is reference directories, source directories. I think maybe we can add it here. So our source directories is giving us all of the source code that's dropped in MFC. Let's just add another one here. Let's make this a little bigger so it's easier to work with. So we're going to add, I might actually paste that project dir backslash and libraries and backslash, and I think it was called Cocos. Cool. So now we can see in the source directories, which is really just, it allows Visual Studio to resolve source code that we want to bring into our project, but we didn't create it, and we don't want to actually physically put it into our project. We just know it's on our file system somewhere. So I will, this looks good. We've got all of the Visual Studio source code that Microsoft gives us, plus I'm now including the Cocos2d-x source code. So I think we're getting a little closer. I don't know if I need to reference directory. We'll find out. For use with IntelliSense. Okay. I don't think that's good enough then. Let's copy this. And let's also add it to our reference directory. This is okay to leave it in here. If it's simply for use with IntelliSense, we definitely want to have some sort of IntelliSense. IntelliSense is kind of like when you're typing a word in Visual Studio, it automatically tries to complete it, and it shows this big long drop down of how you could finish off what you're typing into an actual object. You'll notice that what I'm talking about once we start coding a bit here. Right now we're doing a lot of plumbing. Okay, so reference directories, we got Cocos2d in here. Paths to use when searching for metadata files while building a Visual Studio C++ project corresponds to, yeah, that should be good. So this is not a lib. WinRT directories. WinRT, I think that was when they first came out with their Windows tablets. They used to have like an RT version of it and then an Intel version of it. I don't even know if this is still relevant. Include directories when searching for include files. Yeah, so we may have to also include it on this path. Let's go ahead so we can have our header files included in here as well. So we'll do that. I just want to look inside of here. So yeah, the header files are all mixed up with the source files. That's fine. I think we're okay there. Additional include directories. I wonder if maybe I should have put them here. Additional include. Yeah, I may move the referencing there, but we'll start where we're at. Warning level, we should really have it to warning all, like it's, yeah, warning all, but for now we'll leave it at that. Yeah, security development lifestyle checks. You know what, I don't want security warnings. I don't want to confuse the compilation warnings too much. Our output directory, that should all be good. Manifest tool, irrelevant stuff. XML dot irrelevant. We're not going to create custom build events, custom build steps. I don't think I need to do that. I might with the resources, but anyway. So now that we've got the references to Cocos2d-x, you'll notice now the squiggly is gone and it resolves this header file, which in turn resolves this namespace, yet it fails to find CC layer. My guess is the version of Cocos2d-x this game was built on, being, 5+ years old, they've removed the concept of a layer, a Cocos layer. So yeah, we might have our work cut out for us. We may. Okay, so let's go. Maybe we will look at their documentation here and let's maybe Google upgrade Cocos2d-x upgrade. Let's just Google that to a new version. Like, I know mine was like 2.0 is my guess. Let's have a look at some of these. This is 2015. Okay. Not very helpful. I'm having some weird issues with Cocos2d-x. I know that Cocos2d-x actually, it obviously started from Cocos2d, and the developers of it decided they wanted a C++ version of Cocos2d instead of an Objective-C version. And anyway, it's really a Chinese open source project, and I don't know if their servers are in China and maybe they're blocking me. I don't know. I'm not, no conspiracy here. I'm just saying. I'm not sure why I can't go directly to their stuff. Okay, upgrade Cocos2d-x, and I might actually add the class in question, CC layer. Seems like it existed in 2013. Setting up a game loop. A lot of these discussions and references are old. Maybe the file does exist. Maybe they still have. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's go back to Cocos2d-x.org. Oh, jeez. Let's go back here. Let's go to Learn. And let's go to API reference. And I downloaded the latest version, 3x, sure. Wiki, website, forum, Weibo, C++. I don't know. I'm not a fan of their site. Like, I mean, how do I navigate? Installation, great. I want to see the API stuff. I actually just want to see the APIs, the actual classes. Show me. What the hell? Installation FAQ tutorial? I don't know. 404. Okay, let's try this again. These guys are killing me. Oh my god, they're just a mess. Oh, Cocos2d-x, you guys are sliding. Yeah, I get it. Website, yeah, I was just there. Wiki, okay. Showcases, yay. I don't know. I'm just kind of FAQ, if such a thing exists. Please read. No, that's not interesting. Okay, that didn't help me at all. And now that drop down doesn't show. See, this is what I was getting before. Documentation and API reference. That's where I was. Okay, I don't want to go there because I get the feeling that's not helpful. Okay. Where do you get Cocos2d-x and what do I get? Blah, 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 blah. Okay, good. So we know that the latest version of Cocos2d-x is using modern C++ because at the very least it has C++ 11 functionality, which is this auto keyword. So that's good news. Our code will be a little... Okay, here we go. Modern C++ API. It's done in version 3. Hence why they kept version 2 around. So if I click on this, let's see where that takes us. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to change quite a bit. Once I get on a roll, we should be good, but for now, there's going to be a bit of a pain period. So, since they don't seem to be friendly with their documentation, I may just go straight to the source code. And base, I assume that's the core classes. CC layer. So I do not see CC layer. We may have to gut this program. So what's deprecated? Types. Not interesting. I don't know, maybe something's in here. Maybe, actually. CC layer. So this is 4 years old. Are you kidding me? Oh, I'm on a branch. Okay, so let's try this. Okay, hold on. So where's the main? Don't you have a main branch? I guess this is it. I guess V3 is the main branch. This is really the trunk or what they're currently working on, V4, but yeah, so there is a CC layer. So I F12'd in, and so CC layer does exist in their source code, but it is deprecated. Yay. So the term deprecation is not a good one. It means the functionality is probably in the library, but by the time you probably get another major release, you're unlikely to see the deprecated classes or objects. So yeah, I wonder if I should just create this from scratch using like SDL, because I am not a fan of bloat. Well, you know what? Let's persevere. Um, let's persevere. So what I want to do is let's go ahead and go through their documentation, and let's try to see. Let's just go through their documentation and hopefully find some examples of how they recommend us using the library now. And then maybe it'll give us a path to follow to update this game. So download the latest source code. We did that. Git cd checkout v3. Yeah, that's submitting patches. No, I'm not interested in that. There's their document repo. Might open that in a new tab because we may need to look there. Okay, so basic content concepts. You start game engine. So they call it a game engine, not a framework or a library, and that's probably a good term for it. A piece of software that provides common functionality that all games need. You may have heard this referred to as an API or framework. Okay, that was kind of my rant earlier. I hadn't. Yeah. But in this guide, we'll be calling it a game engine. Game engines include many components that, when used together, will help speed up development time and often perform better than homemade engines. A game engine is usually comprised of some or all the following, yada, 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 yada. So yeah, a renderer, of course. Definitely renders. It renders at typically 30 to 60 frames a second. On each render, it'll do an update phase and a render or a draw phase where it draws and handles input. And that's typical of the games we're going to build. Like, we're going to build game loops. Purpose of a game loop is it just loops continuously. And for example, you've all played enough games to know that frames per second is a big thing. And you know, you probably heard as well that the human eye records at like 29.97 frames per second, so basically 30 frames per second. So as long as your game renders at 30 frames per second, the human eye doesn't really see any jitter in it. So yeah, so with a game loop, every second there's really 30 there's 30 frames, and basically the frame is in terms of your code is concerned. There's really a handle input phase of that frame where it handles the input, which would be like your gamepad. Like, what are you pressing? What keys are you pressing? Where's your mouse pointing? You know, what are you clicking? And then there's an update where, based on those inputs and based on maybe the properties of the objects in the game, such as, let's say, a really simple platform game where you've got the player and you've got like a bad guy. And during the update phase, the bad guy may have some AI that, you know, he's going to actually home in on where the player is located. Or during the update phase, maybe he has some properties set that say something like, he's moving at 20 miles an hour in this direction. And based on that, you know, 1/30th of a second at 20 miles an hour, he should move, you know, let's say 20 pixels to that direction. So the update phase is where we actually update typically the location of things. And then finally there's a render or a draw phase in that frame where you actually take, after those updates have been applied, you then draw where the bad guy is at that moment in time, where the player is in that moment of time, and where any of the other active sprites would be in that point of time. So that way you see the actual movement played out after the updates have occurred. So really the updates, think of it as like where we do the heavy math, right? We do a lot of geometry, we do a lot of math, we number crunch. And then in the render or draw phase is where we actually draw those sprites out in their locations. So that's in a nutshell what we do in a game, right? That's all a game really is. Of course, there's a lot more to it, you know, handling the input and doing the calculations and having to draw on the screen. But that's what this is getting at. A game engine handles all that heavy lifting, right? It handles the rendering of sprites on the screen for you. So you don't need to, you know, double buffer, which is a concept we'll learn about later. You don't need to blit, you know, pixels onto the screen. You don't really need to worry about the collision detection. You don't really need to worry about creating a hitbox around a player's sword or, you know, or around a bullet. Right? Because that's kind of built into the objects in Cocos2d-x. It's a pretty good engine. I like it. This game that I'm trying to get up to snuff right now and working with the latest version of Cocos2d-x, it's going to have a lot of source code. So it's going to be like our capstone or our final project for the C++ course, because it's got a ton of code. Like, look at this. Like, have a look at this. Like, you know, we've got just the delegate. This is just simply the guy who creates something called a director. This is just the guy who just starts the game. Doesn't really do anything other than, you know, turn it on, set the animation rate to 60 frames a second. You know, where we set all the, kind of all the plumbing gets done in here. The arcade layer, though, this is definitely a layer where the actual game is played. The arcade layer actually is a menu layer where you can choose arcade mode. Shit. If I could stream on my Mac, you could see. Hold on. I want to run the game. And I'll try to stream on my MacBook here. So I'm going to stop the stream in a second. I'm going to move that over because it's like infinite picture. So I'm going to stop the stream. And I think, let me just change. I've got my Twitch streaming stuff on my MacBook. I'm just mucking with that right now. But I know I've got to change one or two things here. So bear with me. How do I do that? Tools. Edit. Preferences maybe. Okay, here we go. Show. Okay. All right, I'm going to start streaming on my MacBook. And I haven't turned off the streaming on my Windows box. It is showing my Windows still. So let me stop. So I'm going to go offline for a second here.